Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm Kelly Dunn along with Tanya Rogers, and we want to thank you so much for giving us a little bit of time tonight. And we want to thank you for joining us for this discussion on hidden bias. Many of you may have just watched a inspiring show, a program on WPTV called Hidden Bias of Good People. If you were not able to watch it, we are going to be able to re-air it tomorrow. I'll give you those details coming up in just a little bit. But Tanya, I know you took a workshop of Dr. Marks before, and he is a captivating figure.
He definitely is. He's very interactive. And if you did watch the broadcast on Channel 5, you probably realized that you could almost talk back to the TV and kind of go through the motions. And if you had someone sitting next to you, probably talk to each other. But he's very interactive in his workshops. He had many of us answering, and the answers he would have on a big screen, and we could all see it. And we saw that many of us had similarities. No matter what our backgrounds were, we had certain things that we agreed or disagreed on.
And some of the comments are already coming in from some of you on Facebook. So thank you so much for weighing in. We're going to encourage that throughout our roundtable discussion tonight. Here's a recap real quick of what Dr. Bryant's presentation entailed, kind of boiling it down. Implicit bias is defined as unconscious attitudes that affect how we think, evaluate, and behave. Our exposures and life experiences shape our implicit bias. Implicit bias can make you act both positively and negatively toward others. We want to introduce now some impressive community leaders who are joining us tonight to continue this conversation and to really get in and talk about it, because as we heard so often throughout the program, when you know better, you do better. And I think this might have been a real aha moment, as Dr. Mark said at the very beginning of the program, for so many people. So let me introduce our guests for you tonight. Patrick Franklin is the president and CEO of the Urban League of Palm Beach County. Welcome. Maricela Torres, Executive Director of the Esperanza Community Center. Thank you so much, Maricela. Maha Ekolali, an attorney and outreach community chair of the South Florida Muslim Federation. Welcome. And Josephine Gahn, Vice President of the Jewish Community Relations Council at the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County. Welcome as well. And to our very own colleague, Todd Wilson, one of the fine reporters here at WPTV. So again, thank you all so much for being with us. Let's get into it. And here's Jones that's weighing in. If you all, I know you can see it on your screens as well. It was very interesting. I enjoyed him, the way he taught. I wish he was one of my professors, exactly, because he teaches at Morehouse College. I agree. I was thinking the same thing, like, man, he would have been like one of the best, that you ever had in college.
Okay. But I was going to say, Kelly, I think one of the things that stands out about Dr. Marks is that he doesn't say, hey, you need to change. He says, hey, I'm the same way too. So I think he tries to make sure that he's relatable. And I think that makes it even more interesting to listen.
I 100% agree. And let's begin with that, Tanya. And that would be kind of the big takeaways from this Hidden Bias of Good People program. And Patrick, let's begin with you. What did you, after watching that hour, what are some of the things that come rushing out after watching?
It brought back memories. It brings back the daily activities that we go through each and every day. As an African-American male, growing up in the Deep South, it made me feel right back to where I was. His picture of what people think of a young black male was spot on. No matter if you were black, white, or whatever, we all harbor some of those thoughts, but they're incorrect when you get to know a young black male. So, there's a whole lot there. There's a whole lot to unpackage here.
And kind of, when I was struck when he was talking about it's what you're exposed to, since he teaches at a predominantly African-American male school. He said, what I see when I see a black man is totally different than what some other people might see. And again, it's that kind of conditioning that is unconscious in many cases.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Maricela, let's throw it over to you. What was your takeaway from tonight?
think that was one of the most powerful examples that he used. Was he showed a picture of his college graduates with the honors cords, and I thought, I love that. First I was so impressed that we're all male, but that was one of the biggest takeaways for me, is that we are conditioned by our surroundings. So the same thing for me. I am used to seeing a lot of Latina women who are professional, empowered, and just independent women. And so when I hear stereotypes about how we are meek and submissive and we are uneducated, I always think, like, where did that come from? That's not my reality, and that certainly isn't the reality of some of my friends and colleagues. So definitely, it really struck the point. That was powerful.
Absolutely. Maha Ekalali, what did you think when you watched?
It was definitely relatable as far as, perspective is everything. And that we're constantly having these associations that are, built, established, and built upon and deeply embedded in us. And we're reacting to situations day to day based on those associations. And many of those associations are just simply inaccurate. And he was just so successful at pointing them out. And he was, blunt, straightforward, and to the point. And maybe that's really how we need to deal with these issues. Like, this is the association that's been made. This is the misunderstanding and the misinterpretation. And, exposure and breaking down barriers is everything.
Blunt and to the point, for sure, but in such a way that, you wanted to hear it. And it was not just calling out someone and accusing them of this way you are, but saying, hey, step back and look. This is something that most people who live in society and breathe experience. I just thought that was, the way he gets the message across was incredible. Josephine, what were you thinking?
So I agree with you. He's charming and so wonderfully presents the case, and that brings you in and makes you feel less threatened, perhaps. Because I think for a lot of people, the sort of the concept, the conversation, the topic can be, people can get on the defensive, and it led me to think a little bit about words that are used. The truth is, we do all bring. These are experiences. This is how we function in society and in the world. It's our defense as well, is what we bring to every situation. But I wondered about words, and I thought, bias is a strong word. Is that perhaps the best word? Perhaps stereotype's a better word. And then I thought, well, as a Jew, there were implications for me, and I started to think in terms of what does this whole conversation mean for Jews? And so it was good. It was very good and very thought-provoking, and certainly worth, hearing.
Joan has been commenting quite frequently and said that she hadn't planned on watching because she says she was not brought up with bias, but he drew her in. So we know he was captivating. But, I wonder if the whole point of it was that everybody is kind of brought up to this on some level. What do you all think?
I have to agree. I think that everyone has bias, but I think the interesting thing that the point that he made was that you don't have to stay in that bias. You can, the more that you are exposed to people, especially on a positive note, you can move beyond that. I think that's important.
Tanya, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I agree too. And I think too, when you get to know people of different walks of life, you feel more comfortable around them. And I think sometimes that helps when you're dealing with the biases. You know what I mean? Because it's like getting to know the person, the core, their heart. I think that is tremendous.
Yeah.
Let's take some time and have each of you kind of talk about the hidden biases that you've seen directed at members of your community or at you in particular. And that's something we want to ask those of you at home as well. How has hidden bias impacted your life and your community? Who wants to take a stab at that first?
I can speak to one. We spoke earlier about it before we went on here. An interesting situation that has happened with me. I've worked in markets from Cleveland to Orlando to Minnesota to here, and the one thing that has been a constant throughout my career is I would go out to do a story with the photographer, and I'd have my notebook in hand and my pencil. I'd have a hat or a jacket that said the station I worked for, and we'd start talking to people, and they would ask me, and they would ask the photographer, well, when is the reporter going to show up? And I was, but at one time I didn't know how to respond to it because I'm thinking in my mind, well, I'm here. And then my photographers would see that, they would start to just point directly to me and say, he's right here. You need to talk to him if you want to try to get this story together. So that's a bias that I've faced throughout my career.
Yeah.
And so, Patrick, what do you think about that? Is that just representation? Is that just people who for many, many decades never saw a Black reporter or
Absolutely.
anchor person on TV, or you know what I mean? I mean, represented out in those fields?
Kelly, we are still dealing in an age where we're still seeing the first Black reporter, anchor, band leader, orchestra, whatever you want to call it. We're still seeing so many firsts, even in our day and time in 2021. We're still seeing the first. Okay, the first to achieve this, the first to achieve that. So if you have never seen that before, how can that happen? Okay, so we always try to teach our children and expose them to all these different variations, but they are still trying to wrap their arms around the first of. Okay, and even within our children's generation, they're going to still have the first of going forward. So how can we expect others who don't look like us to accept that we have reached that level? If they have never even seen that before. So, in Tom's defense, we see it all the time. How can that young man right there with dreadlocks be a lawyer? Okay, how can that happen? That's not what a lawyer looks like. So when we look at all these different biases that go on, we have to deal with it at so many different levels that, from a minority perspective, we understand it, but others don't.
Mm-hmm. And I would, Maha, what about with the Muslim community?
Yeah, for our community, it's layered, because Islam is a religious identity. But within Islam, there's huge diversity. The population is so diverse. So, for example, if you have an African-American Muslim, that's 2 layers of bias that you're trying to overcome. For me, as a Muslim woman who's an attorney, I've had all kinds of situations happen. I mean, I've been in line at the courthouse, full suit and a briefcase, and been told, this is the attorney only line. And, just trying to deal with this idea and this perception that Muslim women are uneducated, that Muslim women are oppressed, that Muslim women are, made to wear their scarf and forced to wear it. Modesty to me is my empowerment, and my education is the ability to empower others and to advocate for others. So this idea that Muslim women are oppressed is such a foreign concept to me personally, because entire Islamic history is about empowered women who carried this faith financially, women who were business women who were educated, women who passed on knowledge. I mean, it is all about empowerment. So there are so many misconceptions about Muslim women. And the other idea is that all Muslims are Arab, which is also false. 20% of the American Muslim population is African American. And it's the 3rd largest religion in America after Christianity and Judaism. So the misconceptions go on, and we won't talk about, this idea that Muslim men are aggressive, and that's just not a reality, and it's something that they have to overcome day in and day out. This preconceived notion and people judging them, and just misjudging them. So it's an interesting journey, and with the change in the atmosphere more recently, it's really forced the community to be a little bit more visible to the outside community, become a little bit more politically involved, a little more socially involved. So it's almost a blessing in disguise, because it's pushing us to say, listen, you need to know a little bit more. And it's an opportunity to educate the public. But this idea that Muslim women are oppressed is often a bit comical to me, because we are definitely an empowered group of people.
Maricela, what about the Hispanic community? What do you think some of the hidden biases are directed at members of your community?
Yes, so I work with migrant day laborers in the North End, and for a lot of our community, the community tends to be isolated, shadows. It's this perception that the majority of them are undocumented, that they are here somehow keeping government when they don't qualify, and that we're just having babies and looking for a check. So we both have this stigma, and they get defensive about it. I personally have always faced the question of, what, you're Mexican? I had no idea. My God, you don't look like you're Mexican. And I always wondered, well, what does that mean? You know, until I finally asked, well, what does that mean? Because I wanted to understand that. My parents are Mexican. I was born in Mexico. So this is what a Mexican woman looks like me. And then I knew where they were coming from, but I wanted them to see what they were saying, right? I like certain people, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think that they themselves needed to face their own bias, right? And I also needed to accept that the majority of people, that's all they know, that's all they've ever seen, and that maybe there's an opportunity to say, well, I am Mexican, my parents are Mexican, and this is what we look like. We have blonde, blue-eyed, brown, all shades, all shades of people. And I think that when people start seeing that, that's when attitudes start to change. But in our community, I think there's a lot of work to be done in integration with the rest of our neighbors. But there's some cultural, language barriers, and so on.
We're going to get to some solutions right after this. I want to get your thoughts, though, Josephine, about biased Jewish population.
Right. Well, so what both Maha and Maricela said are also apply here. You know, we are also, it's layered and it's nuanced. And just as she said, the Muslim community is not monolithic, neither is the Jewish. So we have, the perception, and this goes to the bias, is that all Jews are white and all Jews are European, Ashkenazi. It's not true. We have Black Jews, we have Asian Jews, we have Middle Eastern Jews, Jews of color, the whole gamut. And for Jews of color, they are facing an added. We also get, I got it, you don't look Jewish. Well, what does Jewish look like? And the whole notion of bias and stereotype is the very essence of what we face in anti-Semitism. It's stereotypes that have become tropes, that have become conspiracy theories, and they are deep, and they are millennial, been going on for millennia, and unfortunately still with us. And then we have the visibly obvious Jew, and the non-visibly obvious Jew, and the Jew who dresses in Orthodox garb and who is easily identifiable and easily targeted. And I imagine that's the same in the Muslim community in some ways. It's the visible outerwear of the religion. So there is that. There is also the problem we found, though, with this whole discussion about bias and race is the denial of the Jewish experience. Because people are judging, this has become a racial conversation instead of, I think, a uniform one about all the biases we hold about each other and one another. There's this dismissal of Jews as white, and therefore white privilege, and therefore white supremacist, bizarrely. and that because you are white, assuming if all Jews are white, you haven't suffered. And there's this complete denial of anything that we experience. And I think that's just as dangerous a reaction when trying to sort all this out and to look at how we think and how, what is behind our motivations and how do we respond and how do we behave. And it shouldn't be at the expense of somebody else. And it's not a competition. This isn't a, who's oppressed more. This is about how we see each other and the biases or the stereotypes we bring to it. And I think that needs to be remembered, because it's very much the Jewish experience now is not understood well. And at times we feel, what have we done? Why are we excluded from this conversation when we're, Jews are as a religion in hate crimes against Jews is the highest of all religious groups in America, by far. When it comes to race, it's African Americans. When it comes to religion, it's Jews are victim of crime. So something is not being acknowledged, and one wonders why.
So let's get into the solutions. What do you think people can consciously do on a day-to-day basis to change their thinking and to help reduce some of this hate, some of this bias toward across the board, everybody? Patrick, let's begin with you. What do you think can be done?
One of the easiest things is to look through the lens of a Black person. And I'm going to talk from a Black perspective. Look through the lens of what a Black person sees as they go through life, as they go through trying to get a job, trying to get a loan, trying to start a business, okay, trying to get money to go to school, whatever it takes. Look through their lens and try to understand their struggle. And if you can just find a little ounce of what they're going through, you might feel their struggle. You might see what they see and the pain and the issues that they see. Because when I look at racism and white privilege, they kind of link together, okay? Because Dr. Marx said that racism is a system of advantage based on race. Then what is racism? Okay, but look through the lens of a Black person to try to understand the Black experience, and I think you would just get a little bit of the feeling and educate yourself more on that.
Todd, what would you have to add to that? What do you think? What do you think things people can do consciously every day to help change?
I think it's tough for me, from my experience, it's tough for people to see through a Black person's lens what they experience. But I think the best thing that they can do is get out of their comfort zone and meet as many different people as they possibly can, so that when they see it, if they notice it, they'll be like, okay, that's that aha moment of, all right, I see what this person is going through, and I know it's not right. Now, if they want to take it a step further, then they can say, hey, that's not cool. You need to stop that. I just think it's very hard for someone of a different race to see through another race's eyes what they're going through. But when they see, when they get that aha moment, because I'm sure everybody gets it, everybody sees it, they're not blind to it. But I think it's more that people need to really experience other people and genuinely do it. Don't do it just as an experiment or just for whatever. I mean, genuinely say, hey, I want to get to know this person. Let's go out for coffee. Let's talk. Maybe there's a friendship that sparks. You never know.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Kelly, I wanted to say something that that was brought up is, I think when people see me, they just assume, African American. And then when they get to know me, they realize actually my parents are Hispanic. I have roots back to Puerto Rico. I have roots back to Panama and Central America. And then when I speak Spanish, some people are shocked. They're like, oh my goodness, she speaks Spanish? How is that even possible? And I lived in Central America for a few years. So I think it's getting to know the individual and realizing, I even have Italian in my background, from my grandfather's side. So we're kind of a melting pot, but it's been great because it's opened me up to different cultures. Mm-hmm. And it's also opened me up to who am I surrounded by? My friends, my closest friends, they all look different for me. And I love that.
Hey, I remember when you were Tanya Cruz before you were Tanya Rogers. So that's how far back you and I go. That's for sure.
Right, exactly.
Maha, let's get into some solutions and some tangible things people can do. What do you suggest?
Okay, I think honestly, it's just going back to the basics of remembering each other's humanity, you know, and there's this process of dehumanizing groups of people and making them less than, and this justification of abuses of those groups based upon these associations that are created in our mind. It's just going back to the basics of remembering our humanity. And I know that Josephine and I have talked about this, where you'll see situations, for example, where the Jewish cemetery was destroyed and the Muslims came together and raised funds to try to assist in fixing that vandalized situation. And there are situations where mosques are burned down, and guess what? The synagogues open up their doors and say, here, do your Friday prayers in the synagogue. It's just this mutual respect and maybe crossing barriers. And when you see that a group is being abused, or a group is being, there are injustices against groups that are outside of your circle, to say, hey, we are here and we will stand with you because this is unacceptable. So it's just going back to the basics of remembering our humanity.
Such a great point. And folks at home, if you have any specific ideas you'd like to share, please do so. We're not excluding you out of this conversation. We're talking about ways to reduce that bias and to change attitudes. Josephine, do you want to dovetail off that? Yep.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's beautiful. And I think that's it. It's a combination of what everybody has said, which is not our humanity, but also getting to know one another. You know, when you know someone, you can't hate them, you know, as much. Maybe you can, but now you know why, instead of an assumption. But it's knowing, it's making that connection. And I think if nothing else, thinking a little bit after following this presentation by Dr. Bryan, even if it caused one to stop for a minute and think about, what am I thinking? How am I behaving? Or how can I change behavior? I mean, just that little consciousness, I think, helps. And then again, as Maya said, it's about, we've all got to be in this fight, you know. We got to help one another, and we've all got to stand up against injustice and intolerance and hatred and anti-Semitism, whatever ism there is. You know, one group can't be fighting it alone. So we need to all stand up and say, this isn't acceptable. This is not okay. And I'm here for you and you're here for me. So I think that's, yeah, absolutely. I think that's really the key here. And we've got to keep reminding one another of that.
Right. Such a great point. Maricela, any specific things you think people can start thinking or doing right now to change things?
One of the examples that Dr. Bryant used was the inclusivity at our places of work, right? We claim that we are inclusive and so on and so forth. But he mentioned how we tend to sort of isolate ourselves into our own groups. I found that very interesting because I think it's true. And until we have the courage to step outside of that, we will continue to just reinforce our own belief system and not have the joys of meeting others with different ideas, that share different worldviews and food. I mean, there's so many different things that we all bring to the table. And I know that my life is richer because I have friends from all walks of life. And I think that one of the other points that he made that really struck me was, you know, watching that news show that you maybe would never watch because it goes against your own belief system. And I know for me, I feel very strongly about certain shows and I won't do it. And I thought, I need to do that. I need to do that in order to also understand where this group of people is coming from. Right. And not always reinforcing my own belief system by watching those things or movies or shows or music or people that align already with my worldview and my way of thinking.
That's a good point. Even our Facebook feeds, all the algorithms, you know, start steering us toward what we tend to go to online, that sort of thing. Todd Shoemaker has such a nice comment, and he recommends we listen, we can ask questions, we get to know the people, Todd, like what you were talking about, get to know people that look different than us and help build that beautiful community. We have about 15 minutes left in our discussion, and I think we want to leave people with some hope and for future generations. And when it comes to becoming more accepting and inclusive of various groups, and actually, Nicole just wrote in right when I was saying that. She says, I have young children. I'd love your thoughts on talking with tomorrow's youth. So how do we take this as adults and realize, okay, I've got to change, but I've also got to teach this one the right way? So let's go around the table again. We'll begin with you, Patrick. What do you think?
Well, we have to teach our children that it's okay to work, talk, play, and engage with others who don't look like them, and really do it in a way that is safe, and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Take that step, and especially after we get out of COVID and we get into back to where we used to be. But tell our children it's okay to engage with others and let them learn. And if they bring something back to a home that you observe and correct them or help guide them, but let them learn what others are doing. I mean, I've enjoyed having my children learn from others. My oldest daughter, when she was in high school, we would host the high school parties at our home because we were just like, okay, I don't want you out, but bring them home.
Bring them to my house. Yeah.
And we would actually we had so many different friends that it was unbelievable that came around, but our house was open to them and said, please come and have fun here. And we learned from them just as they learned from us. And I think if we as parents can do that with our kids and expose them, let them go out, they will bring back and tell you what they've learned.
I'm sure, Todd, and you probably meet a lot of young people who say, "Oh, I want to go into TV or whatever." And what do you recommend?
You know what? I'll tell you this. From my experience, I always told my kids to always treat everybody equal, and that has stuck with all of my kids, which I'm really happy. Not to say that I'm the perfect parent or not, but I always tell people, treat people the way you want to be treated. And so far, I can say that my kids have done well. In my house tonight, I have 2 white young men that are coming from Orlando. I have 2 black men that have shown up that they all grew up in my house. I've got a Puerto Rican guy in my house tonight. So I got a house full of people of all colors. And I tell my kids, treat everybody equal, and you never know who will turn out to be a friend. And these are all lifelong friends of one of my sons. And so I say to everybody, treat people the way you want to be treated. And I think you can't go wrong.
Be the role model, that's for sure. Maha, what do you think about the advice to young people?
Well, I think it depends on what age group we're talking about. So for very young children, I'm a very big storyteller. I believe in books. I think that different cultures, different religions, we should try to have people, encourage people to publish books about their cultures and have children read them and, make it an opportunity to learn. The other thing I recommend, not everybody's able to do it, but if you're able to do it, travel with your children. My kids were always world travelers, and in doing that, they see the beauty in everyone, and it changes your perception of the world, and it makes it such a smaller place. So it's just travel, storytelling, having circles where you can, be forthright and ask questions, and no question is a bad question. I want you to ask me, well, what is a hijab? Why do you wear that? What is it for? What does it mean to you? Don't be afraid to ask the question and to have safe spaces for those discussions. And a lot of it, again, is exposure. I think Todd spoke of it, where just having your kids, like my children, it's like a UN, their friends are from all over the world. Even within our family, we have Chinese people, Brazilian people, Puerto Ricans, Cubans. I mean, we've got it all. Yeah. So it's just appreciating that, and you know, breaking barriers through food is a big thing also.
That's
Perfect.
a great idea. That's for sure. We had Joan that wrote in a few minutes ago who said host an international student. That's a great idea too. Wow, what an incredible way to kind of let your children experience that if you're able to do it. Josephine, what do you recommend?
So, you know, while we're not there yet, I think we also need to realize that we're at one of the most tolerant points in time. Our kids are already far more tolerant of so many people than was previously the case. So I think we mustn't lose hope and think this is dire. This is so much better than it ever was in history. I hope for truly Martin Luther King's vision that we're all judged by the contents of our character. You know, race is an artificial construct. It's a nonsense, and yet we still define so many people by it. And I think we need to don't judge people surely on this. Talk about who people are and what their character is, and not racializing everything and therefore make assumptions. You can't make assumptions about race, as we just heard, and you can't make assumptions about people's experiences. You need to know them. You need to know what their story is. And that comes through exposure and willingness to engage that. What I do hope for the next generation is certainly that they are taught a much fuller history of this country as well. I think that was a very valid point, not to take away the greatness of this country, but it's got to be taught in all its fullness and all its complexity and all its honesty. I think Americans have to deal with their historical racism and past. And I think it'll make us a greater country and one we can all be proud of. So I do hope a fuller teaching of the history would be something our children learn.
I was really impressed with Dr. Marx's presentation when he was talking about exactly that it's not a country of immigrants, it's a country of foreigners. Because if you say immigrants, you're excluding the Native Americans and certainly African Americans who were brought over as slaves. That was a powerful, powerful point. You're going to be able to rewatch this program, by the way, everybody, tomorrow. I'll give you the details in a moment. Maricela, let's wrap up this point. We were talking about hope for the future generations. How do you instill this in young people?
I have found that the younger generations are more open than I have that I ever was. And for example, my niece who lives with us has for many years. She just strikes me. I'm always learning from her. And one of the things that I love about her is that she holds me accountable. She points out some of my biases, and as embarrassing, and sometimes it can be very difficult as an adult to say, you know, to explain away something that as I listen to her, I start thinking, you know, she's so right. And initially she started calling me out by saying, you're so judgy. Right. So of course, when she said judgy, my reaction was awful. Right. I felt attacked. And we had a discussion where we sat down and we talked about it. And she said, well, maybe I used the wrong word. But it forced me to analyze what she was saying. And I agreed with her. Maybe I wasn't necessarily being as honest about what we were discussing. And kids see that. They are not fooled. And I think that as we grow up, we try to cover certain things behind, we try to explain away what is right. And they hold us accountable. At least this generation that I'm in contact with, and they do that a lot, and they're so open, and I'm hopeful for the future because of that. With these
That's
kids.
fantastic. Tanya, you're raising two beautiful women, and you know, what are you you see it from an aspect like all parents out there, especially at the ages your young ladies are. What do you think about inspiring the young people of tomorrow, or continuing to learn from them. Apparently, we probably all are learning from them as well.
I think everybody summed it up well, and it's really our actions speak louder than our words. And what we do, our kids imitate more than we care to admit, but they do imitate what we do. And I think that sets a great example, if we can set a great example. And I think too, it comes down to the heart. You know what, when you're secure as a person and you're secure as an individual, everyone else, you're going to be secure around them too. And you're not going to be feeling like, oh, I'm above you or below you or whatever. So I think it all comes down to the heart and just loving people and being genuine about it.
Totally agree. Well, for those of you at home, if you were not able to watch the special tonight, it will be re-aired coming up tomorrow at 10 o'clock on the WPTV app on your favorite streaming device. You'll be able to watch Hidden Bias of Good People. If you missed it tonight, we strongly encourage you, or if you're watching and you saw it, you think someone else can benefit from it, please let them know. It is impactful, that is for sure. And we want to say thank you so much for joining us on this late evening and for staying up late. I got to get ready to do the news at 11 o'clock. But Patrick Franklin, Marcela Torres, Maha Eflali, and Josephine Dawn, also Todd Wilson, Tanya Rogers. Thanks everybody for joining us. And for those of you at home, thanks for sharing some of your time. And we hope you got a lot out of the program tonight. It's a real credit, in my opinion, to WPTV, but to also our parent company, Scripps, for putting this on in prime time. It's that important to our parent company. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful night, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Good night, everyone.
Take care.
Good night, everyone.